Something that can be really important, and you probably noticed it when I had my Coleman stoves open, is wind. Both of them had side windshields to protect, and a back windshield to protect the flame. That's important on all stoves because fire can blow around in the wind. On a butane stove, they tend to work like a jet, so the flames are shooting out at super high speeds. They could use a windscreen, but it's not always necessary because they seem to be a little more powerful. But an alcohol stove, especially one that doesn't have the jets, is going to require a windscreen, even if it's just 5 to 10 mile an hour winds. This will blow around like a candle, so it'll be easy to move around. So keep in mind, if you're carrying something like an alcohol stove, you must bring a windscreen. This, not necessarily, until you get up into the 20 and 30 mile an hour winds, and then you're probably going to need it as well. These usually are built in, so you're fine with Coleman. Remember, lighting your stove can be the most important part of the whole thing. If you bring all these stoves and you have no method to light them, they're not going to do you much good. So, you have a couple choices there, and I only have a few here to show you, but I just wanted to show you what I have. Bring a lighter. It's a perfect source of fire. Bring a book of matches. As long as they're not wet, they'll work just fine. Or, bring a stove along that has an electric start on it. Keep in mind, in cold weather conditions, you're not going to be able to light this with a pair of gloves on. You're probably not going to be able to light the matches with a pair of gloves on. So, it can be hard to do if your hands are frozen to light any of these. One of the easiest things is electric. Electric doesn't seem to be affected by any cold weather conditions. It still sparks just fine. You can also bring a sparker, a ferro rod, to spark your items. Alcohol will not spark very well in cold weather, so keep that in mind as well. Something I didn't mention, spare parts. When you're going on a camp out or a backpacking trip, you want to make sure you have spare parts. For a day hike, it's not that big of a deal. If you can't cook your food, it's not going to affect you in any way. But on a week-long hike, if you can't cook your food, it's not going to be very much fun. A lot of these butane stoves have O-rings and jets, and spare parts can be vital when you're on the trip. You don't want to get out there and find out that your O-rings are not functioning, are dry rotted. So make sure you have spares. And on the butane, they have long tubes in them sometimes for the white gas, which have O-rings on those. And if those dry rot, none of that pressure will get into the burners. And on the alcohol stoves, some of them have silicone bands and silicone hoses. If any of that's dry rotted, or if you have a hole in one of your bottles, you can be done for. And a little extra carbon felt, if you're taking one of these along, is not a bad idea. Since the stuff is black, if you drop it while you're hiking, you'll never find it in the dark. It's just too hard to see. So have a spare batch, maybe in your backpack or something, since it's so light. The next thing I'd like to talk about is Boy Scout camping. Keep in mind, the Boy Scouts have a lot of rules, and you have to abide by them if you want to go on their campouts. One thing I'd strongly suggest to adults and scouts is to remember that alcohol is not allowed in scouting. So let's go the extra effort and wrap our cans, our beer cans, so that we don't show off the alcohol as a beverage to the scouts. Don't want to tempt any young minds. Also, if you're going on a long trip with the Boy Scouts, a lot of times they have rules. And alcohol stoves are not allowed on the Philmont Scout Ranch for you scouts out there. So, don't even try to bring one of those, because you won't be able to do it. Another thing to keep in mind when you're scouting is there's a lot of transportation involved when you're going on a long backpacking trip, especially out of state. You can't transport fuel with you. So make sure before you go, you check your stove and verify that the place you're arriving at, they have the fuel to purchase there when you get there. I know we went to Philmont Scout Ranch a couple years back, and we took this one along. And they sold the Promax fuel at the Scout Ranch. A couple years later, we went again, and they sold the Primus fuel at the ranch. So, keep that in mind. But as of right now, the Boy Scouts have a ban on alcohol stoves in their camps. So that would make it awful difficult for you to take that along, get out there, and find fuel for it. Because they're not going to sell it if they don't want you out there with it. A lot of us use our alcohol stoves, our butane stoves, and our Coleman stoves as a hobby. We may not be going hiking. We may not be going camping. We may not be going backpacking. We may be just goofing around with them in our garage or in our backyards. So if you're one of those, experiment, play around, try a few different models. Obviously, it can be expensive. Start off with something simple. Try to make yourself a can. But be careful. These can be dangerous. I have a couple videos where I actually show some huge fires coming out of my can-type stoves. I always test them outside a few times before I ever bring them into the garage. And when you're using them in the house, remember, the fumes that any stove puts off can kill you if you get too many fumes in the house. So don't ever use a stove of any kind for heating in any place that's enclosed. It should always be an outdoor event. Or have some kind of safety, such as a fire extinguisher handy, in case it gets out of hand. Remember, when you're planning your trip, make sure you have the right equipment for the job to get it done the fastest and the best way you can. If you're planning on cooking for 50 guys, and you got to cook enough pancakes, get them out on the trail bright and early, you need a big griddle. Pick the right equipment for the job.